Yeah, in frame. I guess audio frame is probably the best
Yes.
way.
Yes.
I like I said in frame, but like, is there an audio frame? What would be the equivalent of that?
I guess it would be in regards to. Oh man, I probably should know the technical term for this.
In line in
Yeah, like I guess in terms of how you're being picked up, there's definitely regards to that because obviously if you're talking really quiet, then you're definitely not in frame air quotes. But
All right. Well, as you can tell, everybody, we know exactly what we're doing here on the
oh
Merlin the
yes,
Mighty podcast. But hello again. I've got Justin here with me,
hello
and
everyone.
literally just kind of brought him here because we're kind of waiting for people, so we might get interrupted, but I don't really care. Uh, this time we talked around about this idea, and I was like, I got to do this podcast with Justin because this just sounds like such a perfect conversation. Though I do want to talk more Dragon Ball if we have the time because you've got me jones about that. But
Definitely.
just it's interesting to hear your perspective, being like not quite as knowledgeable at everything. So no, really, that fresh perspective is great. Like by the last podcast by Buddy John is not a hardcore Star Wars fan, so hearing his opinion on Star Wars movies is more legitimate than mine or anybody else's that loves Star Wars because we're too biased about everything. So no, please tell me. But anyway,
Yeah.
topic for this one is very specific because of how weird and interesting culturally I think it is. Okay, Criterion Collection. Okay, somebody says, oh, the best of the best, according to them, the Criterion people. Try to select films that are culturally relevant in some way. They're impactful. They matter. You should see them at least once. Now, Michael Bay is kind of a controversial figure
That's probably the nicest way to put it.
in the medium of film and popular film for sure. When you think like artistic, experimental classics, which Criterion has a lot of, Michael Bay is probably not the first name you'd think of, but we'd often joke about how not one but two Michael Bay films are in the Criterion collection. At least, are there more?
To my knowledge, there's only two, and it's probably better that way.
Okay, so okay, one of them I find more acceptable, but also not because on one hand I think okay, all right, let me back up here. All right, so the first one is The Rock. Okay, okay. Now we'll get into these in more detail because I do want to hear your opinions before we dive in. But basically, when I hear The Rock, I'm thinking on one hand, all right, well, that's a better movie that I genuinely do like, unironically, compared to the other one. But I don't think it has any kind of like watermark, landmark. Like when I think like great, timeless Criterion film, I'm thinking The Rock. It's a good action movie from the '90s.
It is.
Sean Connery and Nick Cage are cool, but am I missing something about like some deep like chemistry about like capturing something? So maybe you'll give me some insight. But okay, so The Rock is there, and I'm like, cool. I'm glad someone thinks it's Criterion worthy, but you know what I mean. It's not like
It's not necessarily in the same vein as Armageddon, which we'll get to in a second. But I think the two sort of dovetail better than what some may be inclined to believe.
all right. Well, on that note, as you kind of hinted, the other one is Armageddon,
Which sounds ridiculous, but we'll run through it in a second.
I want to get his perspective because I've always felt he had something to kind of say on it. But with Armageddon, I'm like, okay, well, that just seems like a bad movie. Most people hate on Armageddon, but I know it's kind of in some circles developed that kind of so bad it's good cult classic. But
It absolutely has.
but even then, is it Criterion worthy? And if so, and this is the other part of the question, if Criterion is making some comment about the true excess of Michael Bay and how it reflects what we liked in film in that time or whatever, how do we justify The Rock too? So before I give my opinions, I want you to help me understand this, Justin, because tell me, The Rock, Armageddon, go.
All right. So first and foremost, I think this needs to be attacked two ways.
Okay.
The first is it needs to be established what Criterion is trying to do, and that's more or less to celebrate film.
Sure.
Looking at it as an art form, trying to preserve films that have more or less had some degree of cultural impact or have shown some degree of artistic talent.
Certainly.
Now, before I go any further, I want to make this very, very clear.
Uh-oh.
I am not implying that Armageddon or The Rock are on any way on par with, say, like Breathless, like the 400 Blows, like a lot of the art films that are really wonderfully and beautifully restored on Criterion.
Okay.
A lot more money to shell out for them, but absolutely worth the payoff. Really good quality material.
Okay.
But
they're in Criterion with them.
They are, and I'm circling back to that in one really quick second. So, keeping in mind, they're trying to preserve movies that are, shall we say, culturally significant and have some sort of artistic quality.
Mm-hmm.
There is some value. So, take for example, the easier one to defend is Armageddon.
Oh.
Now, like I said before, I am not implying this is a beautiful art film that everyone is missing the point of. That is so far from the truth. Personally, I enjoy Armageddon because I think it delivers on what it promises.
Very true.
And for other reasons that I'll get to in a second, I think it has a little bit more in regards to both stylistic value as well as in terms of cultural significance.
Okay.
Now, I know it's been ages, but Armageddon was a huge movie at the time.
Oh,
and
yeah. That was like one of the biggest movies of 98.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And people talk about it to this day like it was yesterday.
They do.
And honestly, when I'm flipping stations and I see that Armageddon's on, I'll be honest, I'll usually watch about 20 minutes or so of it. Again, not implying that it's a good movie. For me, it's got so bad it's good qualities. But there's two big things that I think are the main selling points as to why Armageddon specifically is in the Criterion Collection.
Sell it to me.
The first is in regards to Michael Bay's approach to Armageddon.
Okay.
In a lot of movies with something like this, we would get these big, dramatic roles from like professional actors who are just pretty much like the legitimate guys you would expect. It's like big, top-notch astronauts, really brainy people that are pretty much just eye candy.
Mm-hmm.
Armageddon says, nope, that's not going to happen. You've got Michael Clark Duncan, may he rest in peace. We lost him way too soon.
Yeah,
You've got Owen Wilson. You've got Ben Affleck. You've got Bruce Willis, who, let's be realistic, the guy is charming, or at least he was in the 90s. But
he was at his prime probably in the 90s.
Probably. But let's be realistic. When we're thinking like top-notch astronaut, we're probably not thinking Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis is like a guy that you probably have a beer with. Mm-hmm. We have this idea of, okay, it's not some big, bulky, brainy person. It's somebody you'd work with. There's sort of a newfound respect for the working man. And that's really what the main person that's published the essay for Armageddon and the Criterion Collection was trying to more or less hit home.
Okay.
And on that same point, the second way I would approach this is in regards to the overall style. Now, again, I'm not in any means trying to tell you all that Michael Bay is a brilliant filmmaker. He's not, but he does have an idea of how cameras work and how editing works. Mm-hmm. To be fair, Armageddon is a mess. I grant you all that. But the one thing that's really impressive about it is the fact that when you look at all the pieces and take in context that this was all done by pretty much one guy in an editing room working over and over across multiple hours to make it look as good as it is, that's no easy task. And he makes it look pretty solid for the 90s. I'm not saying it's an editing marvel, but you can definitely tell that he has an idea of how photography works, how cinematography works, and more or less trying to find a way to tell his story in a way that's going to be satisfying and as well get the ideas across that he wants to get across. Is it perfect? No. But
it sounds to me like you're trying really hard to say without saying it that Michael Bay is a pretty good filmmaker in his own way.
Honestly, and I'll be blunt here, I think in like the early 90s, Michael Bay, dare I say it, was a fairly competent filmmaker. Now, am I saying that 13 Hours was a phenomenal movie? No. Am I saying Transformers is a cultural marvel?
Oh.
Absolutely not.
Oh, no.
But I think because he was still working through some of his personal projects. He was a very competent film student.
Yeah.
He had interesting ideas. He had unique approaches. Was everything he said solid? No, but he genuinely had interesting approaches to things, and I think at the start he found a nice balance between, okay, this is stupid, but it's going to be stupid in a way that's fun and accessible.
Well, I think you're getting to a really interesting idea here, which maybe is something that the people at Criterion really saw and they were going for when they put him in the catalog. With something like Armageddon, specifically, I'm not so sure, but I've seen some work discussion about Michael Bay that despite the excesses of his more recent filmography, the guy is pretty competent. I mean, he certainly has an eye. You're right. He knows cinematography. He knows practical stunt work, and also to some degree, even with the Transformers movies, for instance, that I hate those movies for the most part. I really
do too for the most part. The first one I think is kind of a guilty pleasure, but
the first one's fine. But my point is his movies, for reasons which have been talked about at length, are kind of horrible. But even so, the technical design and all the hard hours that went into creating those Transformers was kind of unparalleled. So like that's just one example of Michael Bay does bring good qualities, and one thing that I will say about him is he knows what kind of movies he wants to make, and is kind of unapologetic about that, which, love it or hate it, is kind of a true artist.
Yeah, and
I guess
with a lot of artistry sometimes comes an ego, and I think that kind of overwhelmed him. But
a little bit.
As far as The Rock goes, I kind of see it in the same regard that Armageddon goes. It's not some big person. It's an average Joe. It's a rando scientist who just ends up going into harm's way. And
I drive a Volvo.
And alongside that, there's kind of this newfound respect in terms of like unlikely heroes that end up part of the situation. And on that same note, villains that are a lot more complicated than just simply I'm gonna blow something up.
Oh no, absolutely.
Like Ed Harris is arguably one of the more complicated villains of the 90s in that movie specifically.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about The Rock, The Rock is just, I remember the weird thing about The Rock is I discovered who Michael Bay was probably around the time that Transformers gained him notoriety. I didn't pay that much attention to directors, I guess, much then. Like, I didn't realize who he was. So when you go back and realize, I liked a movie created by some guy that I disliked all these years, I'm like, oh, wow, he made that? Like, with the exception of a couple moments, I can't tell, which is kind of speaks to his craft as a filmmaker, is that with some of the movies he has done, he doesn't have to do it the Michael Bay way. He just chooses to.
Yeah.
Sometimes when he goes and rolls with it.
I think that's why the earlier movies have a little bit more significance. I can't speak to Bad Boys because I never actually saw it. But
have you ever seen Bad Boys 2?
Parts of it. Never in full.
Bad Boys 2 is probably the ultimate Michael Bay movie.
I believe it.
For better or worse. It's pretty... It's like, I kind of liked it as a, the 14-year-old Joe probably would, in the same way
things are going boom and lots of gunplay.
And it's the Triple X thing again, man. The shots. Was one of my favorite movies, dude. It's like this is where I was at. And so it fit in line. But looking back at some of the scenes in Bad Boys 2, like they're so excessive, so exploitative, and just. I don't know if it speaks to his character, but just some of the racist and misogynistic stuff is off the charts. But is that part of?
I think that's sort of thing? Where Bay started going downhill. You could argue Pearl Harbor, but I feel like there's some good things in Pearl Harbor. Cuba Gooding Jr. does a solid job. The actual attack scene is phenomenal.
It's hard to believe that came out in 2001 because those still hold up really well.
Oh yeah, no, there's a lot of good things in Pearl Harbor. It just has the misfortune of being way too long, casting Ben Affleck, and the storyline, especially the romance, is very wooden and forced.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. Wooden and forced is right. But the historical context around that was pretty cool.
Yeah, like a lot of a lot of the stuff going on behind the scenes, again, still very much speaks to Michael Bay knows how to use a camera, knows how to get an interesting shot.
You know what I think that actually speaks to is, I think Michael Bay has qualities of a really good director, because you know what he does do successfully, whether we like it or not, he's usually pretty good at really creating a world and making it feel like we're in it. I mean,
honestly, for the most part, I'd agree with that.
He does, and you know, his films are very much his own. When you see a Michael Bay movie, and he wants you to know it, you know it's a Michael Bay movie.
Yeah, all I got to see is like maybe 3 to 5 seconds. It's like, yep, no, that's it. Extreme close up, Brando explosion. You know it. It may not necessarily mean it's a good movie, but you definitely get the vibe that yes, this is what I'm watching. This is what I've gotten myself into.
So he knows his craft. He knows his identity, the type of movies he likes to make, and he, with the editing in Armageddon you talked about, he definitely has passion for it.
Absolutely,
he loves his craft.
And I'm not meaning to imply that Armageddon is bulletproof because it's one guy working his fingers to the bone to make sure that it's something visually appealing. There's still problems with it, but there's still deep respect for that quality that I think is not only something to respect in terms of filmmaking, but also just in terms of how somebody puts something together. And that's sort of the same reason why I think the whole Academy trying to do Best Popular Film is ridiculous, because
is that still a thing?
It got pushed back.
Okay.
It's not officially dead, but there's been a whole mess of celebrities who have pretty much said this is dumb, for lack of a better word.
Hold your thoughts, because I like where you're going, but you just made me go on a tangent. I totally agree with you, man. Best Popular Film is just another reason why I'm so irritated about the Academy, and why I don't really care that much about what they say, because that right there speaks to the problem with the Academy so strongly. Best Popular Film? What are you trying to say? Are you trying to kind of just say, okay, well, here's the films that really matter, and then we know you want us to talk about these, so here you go. Here's one. We do look at these. We just don't care. It's more insulting than anything. Just look at all the movies, vote, and you know, and I know you're going to lobby anyway for which ones you want, but that would be the fair way to do it. Just get a bunch of film critics or whatever, so randomly select them, see what we come up with each year. Like, that's more fair, I think.
No, absolutely. And God, I think the biggest problem with it is, while I understand that there's been multiple years in which most if not all of the movies that were nominated for Best Picture weren't exactly big mainstream hits, there's still movies that are in the mainstream that have worthy artistic qualities and are absolutely deserving of Academy Awards.
Absolutely. And
it's like Best Popular Film just seems, frankly, kind of pointless and redundant.
And insulting. And
also, to varying degrees, insulting. Like,
oh, man. Great.
I have no artistic value. I am simply appealing to the masses. That's
so. Why are we even pretending like you should be here?
Why is this an award for an award that literally celebrates the art of film? Don't get me wrong. The problems with the Academy, both old and new, are a ongoing issue that I don't see getting resolved anytime soon. Green Book is a testament to that. But
I didn't see it. I've heard some people like it. I mean, it seems like a pretty it seems like a shoo-in for Best Picture.
It's well acted. That's about all I can say.
Well, with those two, I would say, was it it was Ali and was it Morrison?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's cool.
And both do a great job. I'm not shortchanging them there. Like, it's not their fault they got nominated for Best Picture. It's not their fault that they won. I would more attribute it to the fact that I feel like the Academy is focusing less on what are the movies that absolutely deserve to win this, and more what's going to get us in the least amount of trouble.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the Academy should try to take into account what they think is best and see what people liked, obviously. Yeah. But if you come to a conclusion, look, it's like the way it is every year when there's any kind of award for anything. Mm-hmm. Some people are going to come out being upset theirs wasn't picked, but it doesn't mean you got nominated. And look, how many movies? I'm sure you have plenty, Justin. How many movies have have we seen that have come out that we love that the Academy never even looks at?
Oh, absolutely.
So it
Tons.
doesn't. So don't get so hung up if some group of people say that your movie isn't worth looking at. They probably didn't watch it anyway. So,
I can pretty much guarantee they didn't watch it.
So that's why I think it can be fun, but it's arbitrary. But I've always enjoyed the Saturn Awards just because, I mean, that's horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, which, you know, the Academy, you know, famously doesn't care about.
Yeah.
So, you know.
I feel like we'll get better with that as the years go by, but we got a long way to go.
So my point is there are other awards out there if you want to find the right venue. But in any case,
yeah.
With Armageddon and The Rock,
yes,
I couldn't quite. You still haven't really given an answer yet. I don't think, at least in one that you've expanded
that's
on.
okay.
That's why I'm curious. Are you saying you believe that Criterion did put? Speaking of a group of people saying movies are good, Criterion put the Michael Bay films in there, Armageddon and The Rock, not necessarily because they were great classic films, but because they were unique in the sense that they kind of demonstrated that the common man could be a hero again?
I think there was that, and I think there is legitimate, not only cultural quality, but also artistic quality. Like, there's really good editing in The Rock as well. And with all this being said, that doesn't mean that there's also a whole mess of art films that have been selected by the Criterion Collection that are completely bulletproof as well. There's a lot of movies that I see that get added that came out like 1, 2, even 3 years ago that I just sort of stare at and like, this is a good movie. I think I understand why it's in here, but would I have picked it if I was in charge of Criterion? Probably not, or at least given it a couple more years.
And I mean that speaks to the ongoing debate I think we've had sometimes, which is it's a very interesting, complicated thing about really just what movies we like.
Yeah.
Because I mean it's very subjective, so trying to kind of put it in any kind of list is difficult, especially when you're trying to be inclusive. But Criterion is trying to capture like a cultural relevance, right? So that's the thing that surprises me about, even when I look at the rest of their catalog, right? Like we talked about, it doesn't seem to quite fit. That's why sometimes I wondered if it was a joke or if it was legitimate. And with ones you disagree with, which I, believe it or not, I disagree with too. But remember, The Game. You got me The Game.
That's another example, yeah.
Which is Criterion, which I still think is a good movie. I think it's a good thriller. I know you dislike it a bit more than I do. But even though I like the movie, I don't think Criterion.
I don't either.
So why did they put that in there? I don't like. I'm like, it seems random. Like of all the
I think
Fincher
in regards
films,
to that,
you know,
again, you've got a lot of really interesting artistic components. You have the matter of the way the narrative sets up suspension of disbelief and then suspension of disbelief of that suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And sort of playing with your expectations based on what you've seen. I think
That's
in
true.
a lot of ways The Game is both fascinating and ridiculously infuriating for that reason. That's the main reason why I don't really like it, because I think a lot of its ideas are meant to draw suspense. For me, it just sort of left me frustrated and annoyed.
Well, I guess we could talk about The Game again. Hell, because I don't know if people want to check out. It was one of the last Film Fanatics videos we did.
It was. Oh my goodness.
So maybe I'll put a link in there to check out Dan's channel. But we have talked about The Game before.
We have.
Which I'm glad we got to talk about on there.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think. The Game, I remember I did find it thrilling and interesting because the concept to me, and I think that for me, atmosphere works a lot. And
Certainly.
And really the concept, when it's even partially pulled off interestingly, I love a good concept.
Yeah.
And The Game, the idea of just kind of feeling like you don't know what's going on and everybody's kind of against you, that paranoia, like what do you mean you're just playing a game, and if how many people are in on it and you can't get out of it is just like such an extreme concept.
It is.
That I kind of felt like it worked. The only thing about The Game which is kind of interesting, that gets complicated, and I think why a lot of people don't like it, I think like yourself, is because it gets to a certain point where it almost gets like satirical, and then the twist at the end, if the ending doesn't work for you, the movie fails.
Yeah.
Because, and I won't spoil it, but I I could very easily understand how people could be frustrated with the ending.
Mhm.
I'm cool with the ending because I think that it's trying to teach the character a lesson, and I think that was kind of the point of the film, and I think that
It was.
it goes beyond a thriller to kind of almost have a slightly more uplifting ending.
Yeah.
However, the the realism goes completely out the window by the end because of how certain characters react to certain other characters. Sean Penn, I'm just gonna say it.
Gets a little cartoonish.
It's like, look, I don't care how this resolved. I'm glad the character might grow from this, but I'm punching that guy in the face. I'm never talking to him again.
Oh yeah, no.
This was not a great present. This was not a great surprise.
This was
This-
idea that went horribly, horribly wrong.
Like, it's like it's one of those. I mean, it's interesting that it could be kind of a concept, and we talk a lot about role playing and Dungeons and Dragons taking to that extreme.
Mhm.
But like I said, it's a cool concept, and I'm fine with the concept and even how it resolves to a point. But the reaction between those two characters,
Just goes overboard.
I'm like, we're not forgiven so easily from this. This
No.
person's either hates him, he's traumatized.
Yeah.
He's a psych ward. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
if I went through that, I would be done.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with the game. I think is the ending doesn't quite work,
Mhm.
but I like what it's going for.
Yeah.
And I think the build up of that is maybe that's one reason why Criterion puts it in there is because they're trying to preserve some things that do work, and
Mhm.
that is something that's very unique about the game.
Oh, definitely. And I mean,
And it might be that we have a guest.
looks that way.
All right.
Should we just cut it here?
Yeah, let's cut it here for now, and maybe we'll talk more about Criterion later.
Sure.
All right, everybody. Thank you.